Hey guys, I am here with David Bernstien, and he is one of the few local Jews in St. George, and so I wanted to do an interview with him. And he's a believer, loves the Lord, goes to here at Desert Ridge Baptist Church, just a faithful member. And as we've been going through Genesis, obviously we've been talking about a lot about the roots of Israel and Jacob. And we're at the end, we're at the close with chapter 49 and 50. And we'll be seeing that both Jacob and Joseph, when they died there in Egypt, made sure that they told their buddies that their bones were to be buried in Israel. And we're going to talk about that and how David's being raised and being his Jewish history and past, and why that's important to him. So, David, tell us a little bit about your Jewish background and your upbringing and how that was important to you.
Well, it's interesting. You assume that my Jewish background made things about Israel and Jacob and Isaac important to me. Not necessarily
Okay.
the case. My Jewish background was largely cultural.
Okay?
I went through the process of becoming a bar mitzvah, the son of the commandment. Went to Hebrew school. My family went to synagogue during the holidays, and we had seders at home, Passover meals, that sort of thing. But it was from a cultural perspective, not a desire to be pleasing to God.
Okay.
Necessarily. God was sort of an abstract. We knew He was there, but our lives weren't focused on Him. But I guess the center of our family's connection and worldwide Judaism's connection with the land of Israel would be summarized in what we said every year after the Passover Seder. You close the Seder by saying L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, which means next year may it be in Jerusalem.
Interesting.
And that has been the hope of the Jewish people for going on 2,000 years now. We recognize, although most Jews couldn't quote to you scripture that talks about, may my right hand lose its strength if I forget thee, O Israel, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
O Jerusalem. But it's somewhere deep inside, and it's stressed every year after the Seder, which is like the high point of the Jewish year, probably that and Yom Kippur. Let's not forget that we are not in our land.
So even though you were thousands of miles away in New York, from thousands of miles from Israel, that little sliver of land was something that was talked about a lot.
Well, it was a foregone conclusion that was our home, even if we didn't talk about it that much. It was only really talked about once a year, after the Passover. But it was a heart cry more than a daily or weekly or monthly topic of conversation.
Okay. So we're going through Genesis 49 and 50, finishing up Genesis, and both Jacob and Joseph, when they die, they're in Egypt, and they both make the point of, don't leave my bones here, bury me in, well, they didn't call it Israel yet, but the land in Canaan.
Right.
Why do you think it was so important to them to be buried there and not in Egypt?
Well, I think that takes us back to Genesis 12, back to the promises of God to Abraham. Abraham believed that regardless of where else he might wander, that there was a land that God promised him, and he manifested that belief, lived out that belief by buying a piece of land in Hebron to bury Sarah, and that's in Genesis 13. Genesis 23:2. Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron in the land of Canaan, Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and weep for her, and 23:19, buried his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, that is Hebron in the land of Canaan. So, the whole concept of burial is not just, it's okay, this person died, wherever happens to be convenient, that's where we're going to bury them. It's a desire to be connected to a particular place. And when you look at the overlaps of the lives of Abraham, and Isaac was born, and there were 80 years of overlap between Isaac and Abraham, and then Jacob was born. So they all lived together. They knew each other. It wasn't like today, my grandfather, when I was a kid, if I saw him 3 times a year, it was a lot. I mean, they lived together. They knew each other.
Yeah.
And they wanted to be buried together.
Right. Right. I think it's interesting because, we're reading about this, and this is thousands of years ago. And, I can't go and interview a Canaanite right now or a Hittite, but I can interview someone whose bloodlines go all the way back to this, and that's pretty significant to me.
Significant to me, too.
Yeah. So how do you see God's providence? How do you see God's providence from that Genesis 12 when he says to one dude, Abraham, you're going to have descendants, and this land is going to be yours forever?
It's interesting that when I was growing up, again, I knew I was Jewish. My grandfather told me at some point in my young life, he said, Dave, and this is right after World War II, where the Jews were still, I was born in 46, the Jews were still struggling to develop some sort of a national identity, well, not a national place to go.
Yeah.
And he told me, David, you're Jewish, you'll always be Jewish, don't ever forget that, because there was a huge effort in the world to, if not kill Jews, at least bring them to the place where it wasn't important to them anymore. But the question you asked is how do I think about the fact that Abraham's blood is in me? It is amazing to me, but it was less amazing to me as an unsaved Jewish person than it is now. Because now I'm much more familiar with the scriptures, with the Old Testament, where God constantly talks about, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to reduce your numbers, but there will always be a remnant, a remnant, a remnant. And when I think about that I am a remnant of a remnant of a remnant of a remnant of a remnant, all because of God's sovereign grace, because of his choice of me before the foundation of the earth, that flabbergasts me.
So when you're reading through, you would see those verses where you're thinking, that's talking about me. Yeah. I exist because of that verse.
Yeah, yeah. And it gives me a mission. I mean, the mission that God gave to Abraham to be a blessing to the nations is my mission. Yeah. So,
with modern Jews, biblically speaking, we believe and we're excited when God opens their eyes in the future and they come and receive him as their Messiah. But like you grew up kind of culturally Jewish more by culture than by conviction, and I see a lot of that today where Jewish folks, they're almost atheistic. Like God is somewhere over here, but not really a part of their lives. Yeah. But somehow it's still in them. Mm-hmm. This idea of the land and everything. And one of the things that I see that I think is a dangerous trend that pops up in church history, and I think is starting to pop up again, that Christians are not really seeing what God's plan is for Israel's future. Mm-hmm. How does that affect you personally?
Well, it's one of the doctrines that troubles me the most is this whole concept of replacement theology. Mm-hmm. Some call it supersessionism. Others call it fulfillment theology, but essentially what it does is it robs Israel of its place in God's plan and replaces all the promises that were originally given to Israel, and claiming that those promises are now given to the church.
Yeah.
That's extremely disturbing to me personally, but more importantly, it's disturbing to me because it impugns the character of God. It brings a person to the place where, okay, God broke all his promises, or shifted his promises from the Jewish people to another group because they were disobedient, because they failed to obey the gospel. Now, what does that say about us being able to rest in the faithfulness of God?
Yeah.
If I am disobedient to his commandments, what happens to me? Am I cast away as a Christian? And it's clear from Scripture that no one can snatch me out of his hand.
Absolutely.
So it's just more than the effect of that theology on Jews and the land of Israel. My concern is what it does, what statement it makes about the character of God.
Okay. All right. So one last question. We're talking to the folks at the Narrows Church. There'll probably be, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 people there for Bible study. How should they view Israel? What significance should they put on Israel when they see Israel in the news with the fighting with the Palestinians and Iran and everyone that wants to wipe them off the planet? What is the modern Christian's responsibility for Israel?
Search the Scriptures.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of work done, especially probably in the last 15 to 20 years. Great stuff by a guy named Darrell Bach, Craig Blazing. There's a book out there called The People, the Land, and the Future of Israel. The editors of Bach and Blazing that goes through
Right.
all these questions. Excellent resource. As a matter of fact, you can find some excerpts of it if you just Google Darrell Bach or Blazing and just look through some of his stuff. But our understanding should be that God has not broken his unconditional covenant with Abraham, nor his promises to David for an eternal kingdom.
He's a faithful God.
Nor his, go read Psalm 2, and if you want to get a sense of Israel in the current context and the future context, you can go to places like Ezekiel chapter 8. You can go to Psalm 83, which talks about all the nations of the Middle East gathering around Israel to destroy her, and what God brings from that. You're going to go to the book of the Revelation.
Yeah.
It talks about the whole world gathering against Israel. Zechariah and Ezekiel.
Well, that's all this promise. Or really not a promise, but at the end of all this, Joseph says to his brothers about all the evil that they did,
Right.
which is similar to that. He says, "But as for you, you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about, as it is this day, to save many people alive." He kept that promise then, and he's keeping it now, and he will in the future. I just want to thank you for taking allowing me to take your time to talk with us, and obviously we're going to be talking about Israel as we go through this book a lot more, and so hopefully we'll have a face-to-face with you at the church someday.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
All right.